Harrison Ford encountered a strange young woman holding a newborn in her arms at the cemetery. As he looked into the child's face, an uncanny sense of familiarity washed over him. Just minutes later, he was left stunned upon learning the baby's true identity. "That ain't no place for a baby." Lucia's voice came out hoarse, like it had been rubbed raw by the wind. Though she hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 days, maybe 3. Time moved funny when you slept in stairwells and under benches. She squatted low, mud soaking through the knees of her jeans, her eyes fixed on what looked too clean, too blue, too wrong to be real. A baby, lying on a marble headstone, wrapped in silk of all things. Soft blue silk, tucked like someone gave a damn. She glanced around, heartbeat thick in her ears. No one. Only the mossy graves of Worcester Cemetery stretching like bones under fog, cold and gray and silent except for the soft, fussy mewling of that child. Lucia was 18. Technically. In practice, she felt more like 38. She'd been on the street since she was 15, when her mom OD'd behind a Taco Bell and her dad, well, he'd been ashes in this very ground since she was 10. There was no one left to give her a curfew, or a coat, or even a name beyond the one she barely used. But this she couldn't just walk away from. She edged closer. "Hey there, little bug," she whispered, voice gentler now, like the kind her mama used to use when she was little and had ear infections. "You lost, huh?" The baby squirmed under the silk blanket, face flushed pink from cold but quieting a little, like he heard something familiar in her voice. Lucia touched the edge of the blanket, fingers numb and shaking. The grave beneath the baby read, Ryland Grayson Ford, 1984, 2024. Beloved son. Father. Lost too soon. She froze. She'd seen that name before. Big headlines last year. Billionaire's son dies in tragic car accident outside Boston. The article had a photo. A clean-shaven man in his late 30s, expensive watch, charming half-smile. Married a woman named Adeline someone, got caught in a snowstorm on Route 2. Died instantly. Lucia looked down at the baby again. His eyes blinked open slowly, then wide. Her breath caught. One eye was a deep ocean blue, the other, a piercing green, like spring leaves right before they fall. Bicolor. "Holy hell," she whispered. "You ain't just anybody, are you?" Then came the sound, low, smooth, unmistakable. A car rolling slow on gravel. She stood fast, heart leaping. The black Mercedes glided into view, long and sleek like a panther. She turned halfway to run, instinct curling hot in her gut, but her feet wouldn't move. The door opened. He stepped out like he was made of authority. Coat crisp, hair silver and slicked back. Harrison Ford. Not the actor. The Harrison Grayson Ford. Pharmaceutical tycoon. 71 years old and still sharp as a scalpel. He walked with that kind of old money weight. Like the dirt itself made way for him. He didn't see her at first. He moved like a man on autopilot, clutching a bouquet of white roses, face blank and gray. But then his eyes landed on the child. And her. "What the hell?" he muttered. His voice was deep, lined with gravel and grief. "What is this?" Lucia instinctively stepped in front of the baby, arms tight around herself. "He was here when I got here. I swear." "Don't lie to me," Harrison snapped. His stare could split bricks. "This is a stunt, a sick scam. Who sent you?" "No one sent me." Lucia's voice cracked, raw with exhaustion. "I came to visit my parents. I live out here. I sleep 2 blocks down behind St. Martin's. I found him." Harrison moved forward like he might grab her, then stopped, blinking. The baby, now alert, stared up at him. The billionaire's face shifted. Shocked. Then confused. Then something closer to fear. "His eyes," he said low. "Good God. His eyes." Lucia nodded slowly. "Yeah. I noticed. A silence stretched long between them. Harrison crouched stiffly, not touching the baby, but looking. He reached into the folds of the silk and pulled out a sealed white envelope, clipped to the blanket with a silver pin shaped like a feather. His name was on the front, in handwriting that trembled slightly. To Harrison Ford. From Adeline. Lucia watched him open it with fingers that trembled despite themselves. His breath caught. She saw the photo first. Ryland and a woman. Adeline, no doubt, smiling but wary, her hand on a round belly. The man looked young, happy, but there was fear in his eyes. Fear and knowing. The kind of look that people gave when they knew the clock was ticking. Harrison didn't say much on the drive back. Lucia sat in the back seat with the baby, Declan or Gabriel or whoever he really was, cradled tight in her arms, wrapped again in that blue silk that still smelled faintly like lavender and hospital linen. The heat in the Mercedes was turned up too high, drying out her throat, but she didn't complain. It was the first warm place she'd been in days. Harrison rode silent up front. The driver was some guy named Marcus, barely said a word either. Not that Lucia blamed him. The silence in that car wasn't the kind that came from awkwardness. It came from weight, grief maybe, or something heavier. Outside, Worcester slipped past. Old brick houses, shuttered shops, cracked sidewalks laced with snowmelt and grit. Familiar. Lucia had walked every inch of it, boots worn through in places where the rubber sole peeled like bark. She should have been more afraid, should have asked more questions. Who takes a stranger and a baby home from a graveyard no matter how rich they are? But she'd seen the way Harrison's hands shook when he read that letter, the way he looked at the baby, not just like it was his grandson, but like it was the last thread holding him together. So she stayed quiet. The mansion, no, estate, sat high on the hill, tucked behind old elms and iron gates that creaked open like something from a ghost story. Lucia's first thought when they pulled up was no way they let me in here. She looked down at her jeans, caked with cemetery mud, the duct tape patching the side of her sneaker. But nobody said a word. Not Marcus, not Harrison, not even the woman waiting at the top of the stone steps. She was tall, sturdy, somewhere in her 60s, with hair pinned into a tight bun and a face like a granite statue, weathered, elegant, unbending. She wore a dark green housecoat that looked too crisp to ever wrinkle. Dolores, Harrison said, nodding to her. We'll need a room ready, the nursery, if it's still. Dolores didn't move, didn't blink. She looked past him to Lucia. This her? She asked flatly. Lucia opened her mouth, then closed it. She shifted Declan in her arms and gave a half nod. She found the boy at the cemetery, Harrison said. He's Ryland's. Dolores took a breath so shallow you could barely see her chest rise. Then, finally, she stepped aside. The nursery's ready, she said. Always has been. Lucia didn't sleep much that night. They gave her a room upstairs, 2 doors down from the nursery. Bigger than anywhere she'd ever stayed, though it still smelled faintly of lemon polish and quiet history. The sheets were stiff, the blankets scratchy with starch, but it was warm. Declan slept in the bassinet by the window, tiny chest rising and falling like clockwork. Lucia sat on the edge of the bed, arms wrapped around herself, trying to make sense of the last 12 hours. Baby on a grave, a billionaire with glassy eyes, a sealed letter, and now this. Trapped in a house that felt like a memory someone forgot to dust. She didn't trust Harrison. Not really. He seemed like the type who played chess while everyone else was still learning checkers. But Declan needed shelter, and for now, so did she. Morning came late. The curtains were heavy and the sky outside gray like dishwater. Lucia woke to a soft knock. Dolores stood in the hallway with a tray, oatmeal, tea, a small bowl of blueberries. No smile, but no frown either. The baby's awake, she said. Lucia blinked. He okay? Looks that way. Harrison wants to see you downstairs when you're ready. Right, Lucia mumbled. Sure.
Dolores lingered at the door. "You got people?" Lucia shook her head. "No one that'd notice I'm gone." For the first time, something flickered in the older woman's face. Not pity, something closer to understanding. "Well," Dolores said, "he'll need diapers." Breakfast with a billionaire wasn't as weird as she thought it'd be. Harrison didn't wear a suit, just a dark sweater, slacks, a silver watch that probably cost more than her mother's car back in the day. He sat at the end of a long mahogany table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Lucia didn't sit right away. "You got security cameras in that room?" she asked. He looked up. "You think I'd bring you here to hurt a baby?" "I think people do strange things when they're rich and scared." He gave a short, dry laugh. "You're smarter than you look." Lucia shrugged. "You're sadder than you act." That made him pause. "Declan," he said after a moment. "She wrote that name in the letter, said she wanted him raised away from the company, from all of it." Lucia pulled out a chair. "So why bring him here?" "I don't know," Harrison admitted. "Maybe because he's the last thing I have left of my son. Maybe because you showed up out of nowhere holding him like he was yours, and I didn't know what else to do." They sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "You can stay. For now. Until we figure this out." Lucia didn't answer right away. "People don't just leave babies on graves," she said finally. "Someone knew you'd be there." Harrison nodded slowly. "That's what worries me." Dolores warmed up over the next couple of days, but only just. She started bringing Lucia tea without being asked, left hand-knitted blankets on the bassinet. Once, she even watched Lucia rock Declan to sleep with a look that was almost fond. "You ever raise kids?" Lucia asked her. "3," Dolores said, eyes still on the child. "None of them mine." It was 2 nights later that Lucia couldn't sleep again. She padded barefoot through the dark hallway, pausing outside the nursery to check on Declan. All good. He slept like babies do, hands twitching, face scrunched like he was dreaming of something way too big for his head. Lucia drifted further down the hall, curiosity pulling her like a thread. She pushed open a door near the end. The air inside was cooler, stale. The room was untouched, perfectly preserved, like someone meant to freeze it in time. A guitar leaned in the corner, shelves of books and old CDs. A Red Sox cap hung on a peg by the closet. On the desk, under glass, a photo of Ryland as a teen, smiling, dimples deep, arms slung around a younger Harrison who looked less tired, less hollow. The next morning came with clouds again, gray and low, like they'd never left. Lucia was feeding Declan in the sunroom when Marcus came to find her. "There's a woman downstairs, said her name's Carmen." Lucia blinked. "Carmen?" "Dr. Carmen Walsh," he added. "She's here to see Mr. Ford." That name hit Lucia like a jolt to the chest. Declan cooed quietly in her lap, one hand curled around her thumb. She looked down at him, then back up. "I'll come," she said. "Just give me a second." Carmen didn't look like she belonged in a house like this. She belonged in a lab or a courtroom, maybe on a protest stage. She was in her early 60s, dressed simple but sharp. Pressed slacks, beige coat, tortoiseshell glasses. Silver hair pulled back tight. She stood near the fireplace like she wasn't there to stay long, like she only came to deliver facts. When Lucia stepped in, the woman turned. She didn't speak first, just stared. And then her eyes dropped to Declan, still tucked against Lucia's chest. Her breath hitched. Lucia didn't have to ask. She knew. Carmen knew that child, knew those eyes. "That's him," she said finally. Her voice cracked halfway through. Lucia gave a slow nod. "Yeah, this is him." Carmen walked forward on stiff legs, reached out like she might touch Declan's cheek, but her hand hovered instead, trembling. "I only saw him once, on a screen. Adeline sent a picture before she disappeared." She turned to Harrison, who stood across the room like a man awaiting sentencing.
You knew? She asked, low. You knew and didn't call me? I found out days ago, Harrison said, voice tight. She left the baby at Ryland's grave. I didn't know about it until Lucia brought him to me. She trusted you, Carmen said sharply. She ran from the people she thought would bury the truth, and still she trusted you enough to leave him there. Lucia could feel the tension in the room shifting. Something old, cracked, but never healed, pressing just beneath the surface. I didn't know she was still alive, Harrison said. Not until I read the letter. And what about Ryland? Carmen asked. He worked for your company. So did my daughter. You really want me to believe neither of them told you what they were uncovering? Lucia looked back and forth between them. Wait, you're saying they found something? About the company? Carmen turned, eyes sharp now. They were investigating a clinical trial. Phase 3 approval pushed through too fast. Ryland was leading R&D at the time. Adeline was in quality and ethics. Something about the numbers didn't add up. One patient died, another went blind. They were pulled off the file right after they flagged it. She crossed her arms. And then, suddenly, Ryland dies in a weather-related accident. Adeline disappears. Their baby ends up on a grave. Sound like coincidence to you? Lucia felt a slow chill run up her back. She turned to Harrison. You knew about any of this? His eyes dropped to the floor. I saw the red flags in the report months ago, he admitted. But Alberto, my COO, he assured me it was handled. I didn't ask questions. Not after Ryland died. I didn't want to believe there was more to it. Dolores entered quietly, like a ghost. She set a fresh pot of tea on the table, but her eyes met Harrison's as she passed. He's lying, she said softly, then turned to Lucia. Adeline came here, more than once, late at night, quiet, scared. She never asked for help, just went straight to Ryland's old office, said she needed something she left behind. Carmen clenched her fists. She was trying to retrieve evidence. Lucia stood still for a long time. Declan had drifted off again, his breath warm against her shoulder. She felt the weight of him differently now, not just soft and small and breakable, but important. He wasn't just a baby. He was the last living piece of something big, something dangerous, something people had maybe died trying to protect. Carmen walked closer. My daughter died trying to do the right thing, she said quietly. I won't let her be erased. Lucia swallowed hard. Neither will I. Harrison exhaled slowly, like some dam inside him had cracked. I'll open the files, he said. Whatever Ryland left in this house, we'll find it. That night, Lucia stood by the nursery window with Declan asleep in the bassinet behind her. Outside, the trees groaned with wind. She could see Worcester in the distance, small, tired lights blinking through the mist. She couldn't stop thinking about Adeline. Not just the scientist, not even the whistleblower. The woman. Lucia imagined her slipping through these halls at night, scared but focused, digging through drawers in her dead lover's office, praying she wouldn't be caught. Adeline had carried Declan for 9 months, birthed him, fed him, hid him, fled with him, and when she couldn't run anymore, she left him on a grave, hoping the last person who once loved Ryland would know what to do. Lucia tightened her arms around herself. She didn't know much about love, not the kind that lasted, but she knew what it looked like in a desperate act. Grief doesn't make a sound. Not at first. It moves in quietly, settles into the corners of a house, and waits. It doesn't cry or shout or break things, not like anger. Grief just sits. And Harrison Ford had gotten used to sitting with it. He spent most of his days now locked inside the study. The room had always been too big for one man, with shelves that ran taller than reach, a walnut desk buried under paper stacks, and an old record player that hadn't been used since Mercedes passed. He didn't listen to music anymore. The walls felt thinner since Lucia arrived, not physically, just emotionally. The girl walked softly, talked even softer. She didn't ask too much from him, but she didn't tiptoe either. And that, somehow, made him feel like she'd been there all along. He'd watch her from the hallway sometimes, how she held the baby like he was made of storybook pages and prayer, how she kept the lights dim and her voice low, as if every gesture needed permission from the silence of the house. She reminded him of Mercedes when Ryland was small. That same kind of quiet strength, the kind that made a man look inward and wonder what pieces of himself had been lost somewhere along the line. That night, he wasn't looking to spy. He was just walking. Sleep had been coming in shorter bursts lately, like his body no longer trusted the dark. He passed the nursery on his way back from the library hall and caught the faint sound of humming. Lucia's voice. It was raspy but soft, worn around the edges, like someone who hadn't been sung to in a long, long time. The tune was old, maybe something from the 70s, not quite in tune, but warm, real. She sat in the rocking chair, Declan curled in her arms, the baby's small fingers wound in her hoodie strings like vines. Lucia was crying, not the loud, messy kind, just quiet tears sliding down her cheek, catching on her jaw, then dripping onto the baby's blanket. Harrison didn't move. He stood outside the nursery door, one hand still on the frame, and watched. Watched as something in his chest stirred that hadn't stirred in years. Not since Ryland's wedding. Maybe not even then. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something more fragile. Hope, maybe. And it scared the hell out of him. He didn't go in. Didn't clear his throat or offer some awkward, half-fatherly comfort. He just stood there in the dark, like a ghost watching over what might have been. The next morning, Lucia found something on the kitchen table. A book. Old, leather-bound, worn soft at the edges. The spine cracked in 2 spots, but the gold leafing still caught the light. Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Inside the front cover, there was a name in faded black ink. Mercedes Ford. No note. No explanation. Just the book. Lucia ran her fingers over the handwriting like it might say more if she touched it right. She didn't ask Harrison. Didn't need to. It was a thank you. And maybe, just maybe, a peace offering. That afternoon, the knock came. Not the front door. Dolores would have handled that. No, this one was sharper, more purposeful. Harrison looked up from the documents on his desk just as Marcus stepped in. "There's someone here to see you. Says he works for Dr. Carmen Walsh." Harrison nodded slowly, straightening. "Send him in." The man was lean, built like a runner, dressed in a brown corduroy jacket and boots caked in salt from the street. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. He had the look of someone who didn't trust paper trails. He introduced himself simply. "Name's Ellis. I do background for Carmen when things get murky." Harrison offered him a seat, gestured toward the bottle of scotch on the tray. Ellis declined. "I've got something," he said, "but I'm not here to hand it over blind. I need to know you're not one of them." "One of who?" Harrison asked. "The ones who knew and looked away." Harrison said nothing for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and let the silence answer for him. Ellis nodded, satisfied. He pulled a folder from his coat and slid it across the desk. "Alberto Vasquez," he said, "your old head of research. Thought you should know. His name shows up in the whistleblower documents from 2 different trials, one in Buenos Aires, one in Ohio." Harrison opened the folder. There were photos, reports. A transcript from a former trial assistant who claimed Alberto pushed a drug through phase 2 despite 2 flagged liver failures. Ellis kept talking. "The trial Ryland and Adeline were looking at? There's a signature override, time-stamped under Alberto's login, pulled from your server 2 weeks before Ryland's crash." Harrison's throat went dry. "Why now?" he asked. Ellis shrugged. "Because Carmen's tired of waiting, and because your grandson's got eyes the color of secrets." Lucia found Harrison in the greenhouse that evening. He didn't turn when she walked in, just stood there staring at the lemon tree Mercedes had planted 30 years ago.
back when Ryland was still in kindergarten and the world felt safe enough for soft things to grow. "You okay?" Lucia asked. He took a while before answering. "I trusted him," he said. "Alberto. We were in grad school together. I brought him in when the company was nothing but debt and ideas." Lucia stepped closer. "What did he do?" Harrison handed her the folder. She didn't say a word while she flipped through it. Just read. Slow and careful. When she closed it, her hands were shaking. "They killed him," she said softly. "Didn't they?" Harrison didn't answer. Lucia set the folder down on the greenhouse bench. "I don't care what kind of suit he wore or how many shares he owned. If he let people get sick just to keep the stock price up, he doesn't get to walk away clean." The next morning, Carmen arrived with something wrapped tight in a cloth handkerchief. The edges yellowed from age and wear. She held it in her palm, like it might burn straight through if she let go too long. "Adeline wore this every day," she told Harrison quietly, placing the bundle on the kitchen table. "Since she was 17, even in the lab, under her coat. Never took it off, not once, except the day she left Declan at the grave." Lucia stepped in just as Carmen unfolded the cloth, revealing a silver medallion on a thin chain. It looked ordinary at first glance, plain, a little tarnished, but it carried a weight, like the kind of thing someone wouldn't wear for style, but memory. "She told me once it was hollow," Carmen added, her voice low, "that there was something inside, but she'd only open it when she was sure she wouldn't make it back." Harrison reached for it, but stopped short. His hands trembled. Lucia stepped forward instead. "May I?" Carmen nodded. Lucia held it gently, like she was cradling a baby bird. It was heavier than it looked. She turned it over, ran her thumb along the edge, felt a ridge, barely there. She pressed it inward with her nail, and a faint click whispered out. The medallion split in two. Inside was a tiny plastic sheath, the size of a pinky fingernail. Embedded inside, a microchip. Carmen sucked in a breath. She was telling the truth. Lucia handed it to Harrison, who stared like he was holding a loaded gun. "We need a reader," he said, standing abruptly. "Now!" They moved to his office. Harrison pulled an old, encrypted tablet from the safe behind a sliding panel in the bookshelf. It was dusty, unused for years, but he booted it up with a passcode Lucia didn't catch. His fingers moved slower than they used to. Every motion looked like it weighed 100 pounds. The microchip fit into the side slot like it had been waiting for this exact moment. A folder opened automatically. ADLRYCRFD. Lucia leaned closer, heart racing. Inside the folder were PDFs, scanned lab notes, signed approvals, but then came the video. Lucia clicked play before Harrison could stop her. Adeline's face appeared on screen, drawn, pale, but resolute. Her hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes. She looked directly at the camera. "If you're seeing this," she began, "it means I'm gone, or I can't risk speaking anymore. My name is Adeline Walsh. I am, or was, a compliance analyst at Ford Therapeutics." Lucia's breath caught. Declan had her nose, her cheekbones. Adeline continued, her voice calm but clipped. "My fiancé, Ryland Ford, and I discovered multiple protocol breaches inside the clinical testing branch, approved and covered by a senior member of the board, Alberto Vasquez. Documentation was forged, fatalities were buried, and we have the signatures to prove it." She held up papers to the camera. Lucia paused the video, zoomed. Ryland's name was there, so was Alberto's, and Harrison's, though his was dated after the breach, on a different file. Lucia looked up slowly. "You didn't know," she whispered. "No," Harrison rasped. "I didn't. Not then." The rage in his chest swelled, not in fire, but in ice. Sharp, numbing. Betrayal always came colder when it wore a familiar face. He watched the rest of the video in silence. When it ended, no one moved for a long while. Finally, Carmen spoke.
This is enough. For the press. For the board. For a courtroom. I'll take it to the authorities, Harrison said, pushing back from the desk. No, Carmen countered. We will. Together. You may still be CEO, but your name alone won't protect it anymore. Harrison didn't argue. For once, he looked like a man not fighting, but surrendering to what he should have done a long time ago. Later that night, the house went too quiet. Lucia sat in the nursery, Declan asleep in the bassinet. She was reading the last pages of the old poetry book Harrison had given her, Mercedes's name faint on the inside cover. When the first thud came, she froze. Then came another, lighter, controlled, not random. Boots. Quiet ones. She slipped off the rocker and crouched beside the crib, grabbing Declan into her arms in one smooth motion. He stirred, but didn't wake. Her breath caught in her throat. A shadow moved past the nursery door. Not Harrison. Not Carmen. Not Dolores. Then came the shatter. Glass breaking down the hall. Lucia ducked lower, heartbeat in her ears. They were inside. She crawled to the dresser, pulled open the bottom drawer, yanked free the emergency phone Harrison had hidden there, just in case. No dial tone. Signal jammed. They knew what they were doing. Professional. Fast. Clean. She whispered, "Declan, baby, stay quiet, okay?" And he, like a miracle, stayed asleep. The old floorboards creaked down the hall, getting closer. The footsteps were wrong, too slow to be searching, too steady to be panicked. They were moving like they had time, like they'd done this before. Lucia pressed her back against the wall, still crouched low with Declan in her arms. The old nursery dresser loomed above her, casting a crooked shadow in the soft light. She shifted her grip around the baby, pulling the blanket tighter over his head, over his face, her own cheek pressed against his. Declan didn't cry. He didn't move. She wasn't sure if that made him lucky, or just small enough not to understand he was being hunted. There was a creak, then another. The doorknob turned. Lucia squeezed her eyes shut. One hand reached behind her, fumbling until she felt the notch in the wall panel, the one Dolores had once mentioned in passing. They used to hide bourbon back there during Prohibition. Now it would hide them. She pushed the panel. It gave with a soft groan. She slipped inside the narrow tunnel and pulled the door back just as a beam of flashlight swept across the nursery. Someone had entered. Downstairs, the scene unraveled fast and brutal. The front door had been breached, glass shattered across the foyer tiles, curtains sucked outward in the cold burst of winter air. Harrison had heard the first thud, followed by the soft hiss of something metal hitting marble. The concussion grenade went off, a deep pulse, like thunder underwater. The chandelier above the grand stairway rattled. The paintings shook on their hooks. Dolores screamed. She'd been coming back from the hallway with a kettle of chamomile when the door blew open. Harrison saw her silhouette go down hard, the tray clattering against the ground, the steam rising from her clothes like smoke. "Dolores!" he shouted, rushing toward her. One of the intruders turned on him immediately. Dark clothes, face covered, military precise movement. Harrison ducked behind the side table just as a bullet split the door frame above his head. Blood rushed to his ears. His shoulder burned. Glass shards from the shattered sconce had cut a jagged line across his skin. Nothing fatal, but it made things real. He crawled low, hand reaching under the hallway rug where a metal floor panel had been screwed down since the house was built. With a groan of pain, he yanked it loose and pulled out the old revolver Mercedes had hidden there after her father's funeral. She'd always said, "Some traditions never die. We just pretend they're buried." Tonight, he wasn't pretending anymore. In the tunnel, Lucia moved like she had back when she ran the alleys of Worcester with no coat and no plan. She didn't breathe unless she had to. She'd mapped the layout in her head already. The narrow path between walls would empty out behind the kitchen pantry, then into the laundry room. From there, She could bolt toward the greenhouse exit. She stopped, listened. Nothing but the faint crackle of a radio in the distance, short, choppy bursts, like code. They weren't just here for Declan. They were here to erase everything. Evidence, witnesses, maybe even Harrison. The medallion, the drive, the video. Lucia clutched the baby tighter. They weren't getting any of it. Harrison limped toward the dining room just in time to hear glass shatter in the study. He gritted his teeth. "They're going for the safe," he muttered. Two men moved in his peripheral vision, one cutting through the side hall, another by the rear stairwell. Harrison raised the revolver, fired once. The bullet hit the baseboard behind the man's feet, but it was enough. He ducked, turned, and Harrison tackled him with the kind of force that only came from rage. They fell hard. The man's head smacked the floor. The other one hesitated. That was his mistake, because a second later, a vase from the hallway shelf came flying, hit him square in the side of the head. Dolores, bleeding from the temple, but up. "Goddamn cowards," she muttered, her voice shaking. Harrison stared at her. "You should be resting." "I've had worse from your wife's book club," she snapped. Then she handed him the fallen man's earpiece and said, "They're not alone." "Shit." Lucia reached the pantry and pushed open the panel. The lights were dead. The power box had been fried. She saw the scorch marks on the wall. She held Declan to her chest, rocked once, then twice, then turned toward the greenhouse. But the door creaked behind her. She froze. One of them had tracked her through the walls. She turned just in time to see a tall figure emerging from the hallway, black-clad, a weapon drawn. Lucia didn't think. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink, twisted the nozzle, and sprayed a thick blast straight into his face. The man screamed, staggered back. She bolted, out the greenhouse door, down the side path. She didn't care where it led, just away. Back in the living room, Harrison stood face to face with the man he never thought he'd see again. Alberto Vasquez. No mask, no hesitation. Just that same smug, cold calm he always wore when numbers didn't lie and people were disposable. Harrison pointed the gun at him. "You came all the way here to clean up your own mess?" "I came to protect what's left of our legacy," Alberto said. "But you," he sneered. "You've always been weak, sentimental. Mercedes knew it. So did Ryland." Harrison's hand tightened on the grip. "Don't say his name. He and Adeline were fools. And you," Alberto stepped closer, fearless. "You were too blind to see the rot from the inside. You're the rot." Alberto raised his gun. Too late now. But the shot never came. Because from upstairs, a shadow moved. Fast, silent. It slammed into Alberto just as he pulled the trigger. Both men hit the floor. The gun went off, harmless, into the ceiling, and when the dust settled, Harrison blinked. The figure stood, taller than he remembered, beard grown, eyes sunken, but unmistakable. "Ryland," Harrison whispered. His knees gave. His son was alive. For one long, breathless moment, everything stilled. The storm outside no longer mattered. The broken glass, the blood, the sirens, none of it touched the stillness that spread through the Ford estate like fog rolling in over a winter field. Ryland stood beneath the chandelier, chest heaving, hair damp with sweat, his hands trembling but not from fear. His eyes swept the room like someone waking from a coma and trying to name the shapes of things he'd once known by heart. Harrison didn't speak again. Couldn't. The words were caught somewhere between shock and grief, jammed too deep in his chest to make it out. His gun hung loose at his side, forgotten. Ryland looked older than the last time anyone had seen him. Leaner, harder, his jaw scruffed with weeks of beard, his once boyish eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. But there was no mistaking him. He didn't walk like a ghost. He walked like a man who had crawled through hell and dragged the truth out with him. "Dad," he said, voice quiet, hoarse. That was all it took. Harrison staggered forward, not quite running, but not far from it, and folded his arms around the son he thought he had buried. It wasn't a cinematic embrace. It was heavy, clumsy, raw, a mix of pain, guilt, and too many things that had gone unsaid for too long. "I thought," Harrison whispered, fingers gripping the back of Ryland's coat. "They told me it was the car. They said you were—" "I let them think that," Ryland replied, his voice low. "It was the only way." Behind them, the police swept through the property, guns drawn, orders shouted. Carmen and Dolores were escorted into the foyer, both shaken, but alive. Paramedics checked Dolores's bleeding temple, while Carmen stood frozen by the sight of the man she had once imagined would be her son-in-law. But it was Lucia who saw him next. Truly saw him. She stood in the hallway, barefoot on the cold tile, Declan bundled in her arms. The boy was now awake, squirming gently beneath the blankets, his tiny hand curled around one of Lucia's fingers. Her hair was wild, her cheeks flushed, but she wasn't trembling. She just stared. Ryland turned toward her. The moment their eyes met, his breath caught in his chest. He moved toward her like the floor might crumble beneath his feet. Lucia didn't speak, didn't blink. Her eyes flicked from Ryland's face to Declan's, then back again. And slowly, like something ancient inside her had been jolted awake, she understood. The nose, the chin. The quiet way both father and son seemed to breathe with their shoulders instead of their chest. She had been holding Ryland's child all this time, and somehow, somewhere in her gut, she'd known. Maybe not in thought, but in instinct. Ryland stopped a few feet from her. The distance between them could have been miles. "Lucia," he said gently, "you have him." She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "He's been with me since that day." "I saw," he said, swallowing hard. "The grave. I was nearby. I couldn't risk being seen. But when I saw you, holding him like that, I knew he'd be safe." Lucia's arms tightened slightly. It wasn't intentional. It was just the reflex of someone whose heart had learned to beat in rhythm with another's breath. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you leave him? Why leave her?" He didn't flinch. "Because they were going to kill us," Ryland said. "All of us. The moment Adeline and I got too close to the truth, we stopped being people and started being liabilities." His voice cracked, just enough to show where the pieces had never fully healed. "I faked the crash, paid a friend to help with the details. Adeline went into hiding. We thought we had time, but by the time Declan was born, everything had fallen apart. She was bleeding. There was no hospital, no help. She died in my arms, and the baby, he was so small, so new." Lucia bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. "I couldn't keep him," Ryland continued. "Not with them watching. I needed someone I didn't know, someone they wouldn't suspect. But when I saw you at the cemetery, something told me you weren't just a stranger." Lucia closed her eyes, one tear slipping free. Declan whimpered softly, and she looked down at him. "I've fed him, rocked him. He's held my pinky finger for months like it's his anchor." "I know," Ryland said, "and I'll never be able to repay that." A silence passed between them. Not cold, just uncertain. Harrison stepped in slowly, still reeling. "I don't understand," he said, looking between them. "Why now? Why tonight?" Ryland's expression hardened. "Because Alberto wasn't finished, and you needed to see him for what he really was." Just then, the officers returned, dragging Alberto in handcuffs through the hallway. His face was bloodied, lips split, but his eyes were defiant. Ryland didn't even look at him. "He was going to burn it all," Ryland said. "Everything Mom built, everything the company could have stood for. Declan was bait, yes, but he was also the last chance we had to expose them." Harrison's eyes filled again, but this time with something closer to clarity. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for not believing you. For everything." Ryland's jaw tensed. "It's not about blame anymore. It's about what we do now." Morning came slow and quiet. No bird song, no chatter in the halls, just a heavy kind of hush, like the house itself had taken a breath and held it overnight, unsure whether to exhale. The storm had passed, but the air inside the Ford estate still felt damp, like grief hanging in the walls. Furniture had been pushed back into place, broken glass swept away, blood wiped clean from the floorboards. But the unease? That stayed. Lucia hadn't slept much. She sat alone in the side parlor, a blanket over her lap, Declan in her arms. The baby had drifted off again after a restless night, his tiny fist curled tight against her chest. She rocked slowly, not out of habit but necessity, like if she stopped, something would break. Down the hall, Ryland rested in the guest room near the library. Harrison had insisted he take it, said it had better light, better view. But Lucia knew better. It was the room farthest from hers. They were keeping space between them now. Safe, necessary space. But space, nonetheless. Carmen arrived mid-morning, her coat still wet from the mist outside. She moved through the house with quiet purpose, greeting Dolores softly, stopping only when she found Ryland seated in the breakfast nook, staring into a cup of black coffee he hadn't touched. He didn't look up when she entered. "You used to hate that chair," she said gently. "Said it always leaned left." He let out a low breath, barely a chuckle. "Still does." She sat across from him. "Tell me about her," she said. "Adeline, in those last days. Tell me what I don't already know." Ryland's face shifted, not with pain, but with weight. Memory. That kind of slow ache that comes when grief settles deeper than the bones. "She was tired," he said quietly. "Always watching the windows, checking her phone, jumping at every sound. But she was sharp, focused. She knew the risk." He paused, eyes distant. "She said if anything happened to her, if we were cornered, she wanted Declan with someone brave, someone who wouldn't run just because life kicked them too hard." He looked up then, straight at Carmen. "She said, if I don't make it, I want someone who's got fight in them, not blood. Fight." Carmen's lips pressed together. She nodded slowly, as though she'd known all along what Adeline would choose, just not who. "Lucia," she said. Ryland nodded. "Lucia." Lucia spent the afternoon in the nursery, folding laundry that didn't need folding. She was doing it to stay busy, to stay upright. Her hands worked on instinct, folding soft onesies, rolling socks smaller than her palm. Declan lay on the playmat beside her, babbling to no one in particular. One leg kicked up, then down again. Lucia didn't talk to him like she usually did. She just watched, quiet, thoughtful. She'd raised him in her own way, with hands that had stolen bread and slept on cardboard, sure, but hands that had never let him fall. She'd kissed his forehead in fever, held him when he cried at 3 a.m., soothed him with lullabies no one had ever sung to her. But now his real father was back, and she didn't know where that left her. Harrison noticed the silence between them. He tried gently to bridge it, invited Lucia for tea, offered to take Declan so she could rest, suggested they all sit down together. As a family, he'd said, and immediately regretted the wording, because what even was a family anymore? He found Ryland out in the garden that evening, sitting on the bench beside the lemon tree, the same one his mother had planted when Ryland was a boy. "You should talk to her," Harrison said. Ryland didn't look away from the tree. "She doesn't want to hear it." "She's not angry," Harrison said. "She's scared. She thinks you came back to take him." "I didn't," Ryland said firmly. "I just want to be part of his life. I'd never take him from her." Harrison's gaze softened. "Then tell her that." Lucia left the nursery later than usual that night. Declan had been restless again, his schedule thrown by chaos, his body still recovering from the cold. She kissed his cheek, tucked him in twice, then slipped into the hallway, rubbing her tired eyes. She almost didn't hear it. A whisper of sound. Gentle. Familiar. She turned back toward the nursery door, pushed it open just a crack. There, in the rocking chair, sat Ryland. Declan lay in his arms, fast asleep. His chest rose and fell in the same soft rhythm that had lulled Lucia to sleep too many nights to count. Ryland rocked slowly, his eyes fixed on his son, and he was whispering, not to Declan, but to the air, to the memory. "To Lucia," he said softly. "She saved you. I watched her and knew you'd be all right. I don't know how to say thank you. I don't even know if I'm allowed to." Lucia stood frozen, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, like someone confessing, like someone praying. He didn't see her, and she didn't walk in. But in that moment, something shifted. In the days that followed, a new rhythm began to take shape inside the walls of the Ford estate. Not peace, not quite, but something that resembled it from a distance. The echoes of fear had dulled. The fractures had not vanished, but they no longer threatened to split the house in two. Declan slept better. Lucia spoke more. Ryland kept to the shadows less. But for Harrison, the stillness only made the weight heavier. There was work to do, decades of it, if he was honest with himself. His company was no longer just a business. It was a crime scene, and each department carried fingerprints of those who had helped bury the truth. The cover-up had spread wide and deep, touching everyone from board members to middle management, some knowingly, others willfully blind. So he opened it all. He went through every memo, every email chain, every financial trail that ran dark when it should have run clean. He fired quietly, precisely. 3 men in logistics, 1 woman from procurement, 2 senior advisors who had smiled too broadly in too many meetings, while Alberto signed death warrants dressed up as approvals. And then he called a press conference. He stood at the same podium that had once celebrated market launches and shareholder records, and this time he did not smile. He didn't read from a script. He told the truth, broken, imperfect, and unvarnished. "Good people died," he said into the cameras, "because I didn't listen, because I didn't ask the right questions. My son tried to stop it, so did the mother of my grandson, and the woman who saved him. She never worked here, but she did more for this company's soul than I ever did." Later that day, Harrison found Lucia in the sunroom, Declan asleep in her lap, his chubby hand curled into her sweater like a second heartbeat. Harrison stood in the doorway for a while, letting the sight anchor him. "I owe you something," he said softly. Lucia looked up, wary but open. He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a wild animal that had every reason not to trust him. "I was wrong about you," he said. "Every assumption I made. I saw someone from the streets and thought, unworthy. But you never left him. You never once asked what was in it for you." Lucia stroked Declan's back gently, then met his eyes. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "Not unkindly, just truth." "I know," Harrison said, voice steady. "That's what makes it mean more." Then came the letter from the court, custody review, legal assessment. It was standard, they said, when biological parents returned after prolonged absence, even when death had been presumed. The state had questions, and rightfully so. Lucia stared at the paper in her hands for nearly an hour. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just folded it carefully, tucked it into her coat, and went outside to walk the property. Her boots sank into the damp soil, leaves crackled beneath her, and Declan's tiny jacket thumped softly in the baby carrier against her chest. She didn't know how to fight this. Not in a room with judges and lawyers and a list of mistakes long enough to stretch through her whole life. She had no college degree, no health insurance, no last name that mattered. And Ryland? He had all of that. He had blood. She didn't blame him, but she feared him. The morning of the hearing, the courtroom was colder than it should have been. Bright with winter light, wood-paneled walls polished and indifferent. Carmen sat in the back row, hands folded tight. Harrison sat beside her, his tie crooked, eyes heavy. Lucia wore the only dress she owned. She held Declan in her lap while the judge read the case summary aloud, each word landing like gravel. When the clerk called Ryland to speak, Lucia's breath caught. She looked at him across the room, tall, steady, dressed plainly. No lawyer beside him, no notes, just a folded piece of paper in his hand, which he didn't read from. He walked to the center, turned to face the judge, then turned to face Lucia. "When I faked my death," he began, "I did it because I believed there was no other way to protect the people I loved. I failed Adeline. I failed my father. I failed my son." His voice cracked just slightly. "But the one thing I didn't fail was choosing who would raise Declan if I couldn't. I didn't know her name at the time. I just saw a girl kneeling in the cold, arms wrapped around my child like she'd been waiting for him her whole life." He paused, breath uneven. "I thought I was protecting Declan by keeping him hidden, but it turns out I was just lucky that the right person found him. Lucia didn't just keep him alive. She gave him a home, a rhythm, a reason to sleep through the night." Then he looked at the judge. "I'm not asking for custody. I'm asking that you give it to her." A silence fell so deep, even the heating vents seemed to stop humming. "She is," Ryland added, "the only person who's never turned her back on him. And that's the kind of mother he deserves." Lucia bowed her head, her fingers shaking as they pressed against her mouth. She hadn't expected it. Not fully. She hadn't let herself hope. Tears hit her lap, fast and warm, vanishing into the fabric of the only good dress she owned. The judge nodded once. Brief. Moved. Gavel hit wood. Custody granted. To Lucia. Outside, the sun had begun to fall behind the courthouse. The light cast long shadows, soft and forgiving. Lucia stepped into the wind, Declan squirming in her arms, cheeks red from the cold. She heard Ryland's steps behind her before he spoke. "Lucia," he said quietly. She turned. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, his face lined with something that looked a lot like peace. "I meant what I said," he told her. "About everything." Lucia searched his face. "Why?" she asked. "You could have taken him." Ryland shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I had him first. But you loved him first." She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat too wide to speak through. Ryland stepped closer. "Adeline told me," he said softly. "Back when she still had time to dream. She said if she didn't make it, the only person who'd ever raise him right was someone who'd already lost too much. Someone who knew how it felt to fight for something that couldn't be replaced." He looked down at Declan, who had fallen asleep in the crook of Lucia's arm, his mouth parted in a sigh. "She meant you," Ryland said. Lucia couldn't speak. She just nodded, eyes blurred with tears that didn't burn anymore. They sat together on the bench by the courthouse steps. They didn't talk again for a while. Spring didn't come fast, but it came. In the mornings, the frost thinned earlier. The air smelled less like ash and more like new soil. Trees around the Ford estate stretched, slow and stubborn, toward whatever sunlight the New England sky would spare them. Inside the house, the changes weren't dramatic, but they were real. The locks had been replaced. The security system overhauled. Furniture rearranged, not for style, but for flow. Harrison said he wanted the house to breathe again. Lucia didn't correct him, though she thought it had more to do with ghosts than design. Declan had started speaking, just a word here and there, clumsy, half-formed, but real. The first time he looked at Lucia and said, "Mama," she didn't react at first. She blinked, unsure she'd heard it right. But then he said it again, a little louder, tapping her arm with those pudgy fingers like it was the most natural thing in the world. Harrison had been standing nearby with a glass of water in his hand. He sat down. didn't say a word. But later that night, Dolores found that glass still sitting untouched on the windowsill, a faint thumbprint near the rim. Harrison didn't return to his old position at Ford Therapeutics. Instead, he called a press conference, his second since the storm, and announced the formation of a nonprofit research and medication relief fund under Adeline's name. He didn't speak long. His voice, usually controlled and formal, trembled when he read her name aloud. The Adeline Grace Foundation. He wrote the first check himself, signed it in blue ink, and quietly told the board, "This is the first right thing I've done in too long." Ryland declined a seat on the board, said he didn't want to sit in meeting rooms anymore, said he'd had enough of watching men lie in suits. Instead, he started assembling a small private research team. Quiet work, long hours, no press. Carmen helped him secure the lab. Dolores made sure it was stocked with good coffee and real chairs. Lucia, meanwhile, had applied, nervously, hesitantly, to a local college's early childhood education program. Carmen proofread her application, rewrote her personal essay's last paragraph 3 times, and then, one rainy afternoon, handed Lucia the acceptance letter with a cup of tea and said simply, "Now it's your turn." Lucia had never owned a backpack, never taken a test with her name typed neatly at the top. But every time she walked into that small campus classroom, her fingers ink-stained and heart-pounding, she thought of Declan, how he laughed with his whole body, how he reached for her in his sleep. That was reason enough. One afternoon in late May, as the sun crept down behind the hedges, Declan sat between Lucia and Harrison on the back patio. A pitcher of lemonade rested on the table beside them, half full and sweating. Declan was in a cotton onesie, barefoot, banging a wooden spoon against a tin bowl like he'd discovered music. Lucia laughed, a real laugh, unguarded. Harrison just watched, eyes wrinkling at the corners, the edges of his mouth tugging upward, quiet and proud. Then it happened. "Mom!" Declan squealed, pointing to Lucia with glee. Then he looked at Harrison and smacked both hands on the table. "Pa!" The word bounced through the garden. Dolores, watering a line of white hydrangeas nearby, froze. Her eyes glistened. She put down the hose, whispered something like, "Thank God," and turned away, pretending she'd dropped her glove. Lucia felt it settle into her chest, warm, wide, unbelievable. She looked at Harrison. He didn't speak, just nodded, very slowly. "Finally," he murmured. "This house has its voice back." It was a Thursday evening when Ryland found her sitting alone under the fig tree at the back of the garden. She'd started coming out there more lately, especially after classes, just to breathe, to think, to be. The sun was low, that golden hour haze softening everything it touched. Ryland approached without a word, but when she looked up, he was already holding something out to her, a folded envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. Lucia took it slowly. "She wrote it before the delivery," he said quietly. "Never gave it to me. I found it in her coat pocket, tucked behind a photo of us." Lucia unfolded the letter. It wasn't long. Adeline's handwriting was neat, careful, and slightly tilted left. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. And if you're holding my son, it means I trusted you. Thank you for loving him before you even knew how much he'd need it. Thank you for staying. I hope you give him music and mud pies and too many hugs. I hope you let him chase fireflies and learn the sky by heart. If you ever find love again, don't run from it. You deserve to be held too. A. Lucia pressed the letter to her chest, blinking hard. She didn't cry, not because she didn't feel it, but because the feeling was too wide for tears. She turned to Ryland, who hadn't moved. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the tree branches above them sway in the breeze. She asked, "You didn't try to take him back? So what do you want?" He didn't look surprised. His voice was soft, measured. "I don't want anything," he said. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to stay." He met her eyes. "I'd like to be here. For you. For him. Not to replace what you built. Just to add to it." Lucia studied him. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached over and handed him the letter. Ryland took it with both hands, like it was something fragile. Then he sat down beside her. They sat there until the garden lights clicked on and the night settled gently over the world around them. A year passed. Not quickly, not in a blur, but slow, steady, like something earned. The seasons rolled in soft succession, each one gently folding over the one before it. No fireworks, no sudden miracles, just the slow knitting together of broken things. The Ford estate, once a fortress of silence, now rang with life. Doors no longer creaked from disuse. Windows stayed open longer, letting in the hum of bees, the drift of music, the sound of small feet learning to move with purpose. Declan, no longer the bundle Lucia once cradled in trembling arms, now toddled from room to room like he owned every floorboard. And in a way, he did. His laughter echoed through the halls like music the house had forgotten how to play. Lucia stood at the garden's edge that afternoon, one foot tucked in the grass, the other pressed into the stone path. Her graduation gown hung in the closet upstairs, pressed and ready, but for now she wore jeans, soft from time, and a white linen shirt Carmen had helped her pick out. Declan clung to her hand, his tiny legs unsteady but determined, dirt smudged on his knees, and an explorer's light in his mismatched eyes. The boy had grown fast. Too fast, she sometimes whispered when no one could hear, but beautifully. Strong-willed, thoughtful, curious in a quiet way. And those eyes, that bicolor gaze, still caught strangers off guard. One eye sea glass green, the other deep sky blue. A perfect split. A mystery no one could explain, and none of them tried anymore. "Bird!" he called out, chubby finger stabbing at the sky. Lucia looked up. "Bird, yes," she smiled. "And cloud." He tilted his head. "Mama, where sky go when dark?" She crouched beside him, brushing a bit of dandelion fluff from his cheek. "The sky never leaves," she whispered. "It just goes quiet." Declan blinked, thinking hard. Then, after a long pause, he asked the question she both dreaded and cherished. "Mama, where's my mama?" Lucia looked at him, his earnest face, his wild curls, his two colored eyes. She didn't rush the answer. She took a breath, soft and measured, and pointed gently toward the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to dip. "She's there," she said. "Right where the sky turns to light, where blue meets green. That's where your mama is." Declan squinted, searching the clouds. "Does she see me?" "Always," Lucia said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "She sees you every time you laugh, every time you grow." Declan smiled wide, those eyes reflecting sunlight like a secret only he could carry. "I miss her," he said softly. Lucia pulled him close. "I do too," she whispered. "Every single day." That night, for the first time in a long while, every chair around the dining table was full. Harrison, now fully gray but standing taller than ever, carved the roast with a steadier hand. Carmen arranged the fresh salad herself, refusing help with a kind of stern joy. Dolores brought out the bread she baked that morning, crust still warm, edges dusted with flour, and muttered that everyone better eat it before it dried. Lucia placed Declan in a booster seat, strapped him in with practiced ease, and sat beside him, her arm brushing Ryland's just slightly. Neither pulled away. No one said it, but they all felt it. The table, once a monument to loss, now held something stronger. A family, not perfect, not bound by tradition, but real. They didn't toast with speeches. They didn't need to. Harrison lifted his glass first, and one by one the others followed. They clinked softly. No declarations, no grand words. But the air changed. Something inside the room settled, like dust finally finding its place. Lucia glanced at Ryland. He gave her a look, faint, quiet. but full of something that had taken months to bloom. Trust, ease. He leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, letting the quiet hold them both. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and the house dimmed into soft lamplight, Lucia carried Declan up the stairs. He was half asleep already, his head on her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. She pushed open the nursery door, though it didn't feel like a nursery anymore. It was a boy's room now. Bright curtains, crayon drawings, a bookshelf stuffed with stories he still insisted be read 3 times before bed. She laid him down gently, covering him with the blanket Dolores had knit, green on one side, blue on the other. Declan's fingers searched until they found hers. "Stay," he murmured, eyes half closed. "I'm here," she whispered, brushing his hair back. "Always." He blinked slowly. "Mama, sky, green and blue, like me?" Lucia smiled. "Yes, baby, just like you." He gave a tiny nod, then yawned, his eyelids drooping. She leaned in and kissed his forehead, her lips trembling slightly with the weight of 1,000 days and nights. "Thank you," she whispered, barely a breath, "for choosing me." She stood, turned toward the doorway, only to find Ryland there, leaning quietly against the frame, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a folded blanket she'd forgotten on the stair rail. They didn't speak. Lucia just reached for the blanket, brushed his hand lightly as she did. Ryland glanced past her, to his son sleeping beneath the light of a night lamp shaped like a moon. He smiled, slow, soft, full of the things he still didn't have words for. She whispered, "You okay?" He nodded. "Better than I deserve." She paused, then said, "That's not how we measure worth around here anymore." Ryland's smile deepened. "I'm learning." Lucia stepped into the hallway, letting the door drift mostly closed, leaving just enough of a gap for the nightlight to spill out. She stood beside Ryland, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The house was quiet again, but not with fear, with peace. With a kind of earned stillness that comes only after the storms have passed and every secret has found its place. Declan stirred in his sleep. He rolled over, his small hands curled beneath his cheek, and in the golden lamplight, his eyes, one green, one blue, slipped closed. 2 colors, 2 parents, 1 family. This story is a powerful, slow-burning tale of loss, love, redemption, and the quiet strength of chosen family. What makes it so deeply moving is how each character, Lucia, Ryland, Harrison, and Carmen, walks a difficult emotional path marked by pain, regret, and ultimately, healing. Lucia's transformation from a homeless girl into a mother, protector, and educator is especially striking. Her love for Declan is not born from blood, but from unwavering devotion, proving that family is not just who you're born to, but who stays and fights for you. Ryland's return is equally profound. A man who faked his death not out of cowardice, but sacrifice, learning how to step back into life and rebuild relationships one moment at a time. Through each chapter, we are reminded of life's fragile beauty. Mistakes don't define us. What we choose to do after them does. The story teaches us about forgiveness, courage, and the importance of protecting innocence in a world often clouded by greed. The human lesson is simple yet timeless. Even from brokenness, love can grow. Even from silence, trust can return. And sometimes, a child's 2 colored eyes can guide lost souls back to each other. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.